Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Endless TBR. My name is Christian, and this is my YouTube channel where I love to talk about books. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to click on this video where I want to share with you guys 8 horror novels that I absolutely love, 8 novels that I haven't been able to stop thinking about ever since I finished them. What kind of inspired me to make this video is I just finished this book this morning. It is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I love this book. I thought it was super cool, super unique. And it's one of those books that I think I'm going to be thinking about for a very long time. Whenever I'm considering like a top 10 favorite horror novels of all time, this is going to be one that kind of pops up into my head. Whether or not it makes the list, I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely one that I'm going to think about. And so it kind of inspired me to go onto my bookshelves and pick out some other horror novels that have had the same effect on me, ones that ever since I completed them, I've been going back and thinking about them and trying to find other horror novels that give me that same kind of joy and terror as when I first finished them. So I have 8 books total. I'm going to keep this video pretty spoiler free, and let's get into it. Let's talk about some books that I love. All right, y'all. So for the first book on this list is going to be Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. So this is actually the book on this list that I finished the most recently, so I figured I'd start with it. This was recommended to me by some viewers of the channel because I put out some feelers for books that will give you a sense of deep sea horror. Me personally, I am terrified of the ocean. I do not like deep water. I don't like not knowing what's swimming underneath my feet. And so I had asked my viewers, like, hey, can you guys recommend me a book that will give me that same sense of fear? And a lot of people recommended this one right here. And I'm really glad that I checked it out because it was exactly what I was looking for. Might be a little bit more of like a personalized book. If you're not someone that's super afraid of deep sea, then you might not be as scared by this book as I was. But it definitely hit the spot for me. It definitely freaked me out. The book is about this group of scientists and like entertainers that are going out into the Mariana Trench. They're trying to discover and film a documentary about the existence of mermaids that may or may not exist out there. The only thing is, these aren't like Ariel from the Little Mermaid mermaids. These are like sharp teeth. They're going to crawl up the side of your boat and kill you type of mermaids. So that's kind of like the premise of the book. And then, they may or may not exist. I mean, it wouldn't be much of a book if they didn't exist, right? But what Mira Grant does so great here is capturing that thalassophobia. There are characters in like deep sea submersibles surrounded by pitch black ocean, and then there's like brief movement along the peripheral vision and you don't know exactly what it is. Or scenes where characters are on the boat at night looking out into the horizon and they see dozens of red eyes staring back at them from the depths of the ocean. That sort of stuff totally freaked me out. A lot of great scenes in here that gave me, goosebumps as I was reading them. And I was super glad that I picked this one out. I've been on a journey to try to find another book that kind of helps me recapture those fears. If you're watching this video and you know of some other great deep sea horror novels, please drop them in the comments because I'll really appreciate them. But that is one book that has stuck with me ever since I finished it, Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. Coming up next is a book that I finished back in December of 2025, and that is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. Just at face value, this is an incredible book. It is just under 700 pages. It's a beefy boy, but I blew through it in like 2 days. I could not put this book down. It's got a great plot that is just nonstop. It's got great characters in it. But the thing about Nosferatu that has really stuck with me over all these months is the antagonistic pair. There's a character named Charles Manx and a character named Bing, and the two of them together are just some of the most grotesque and unsettling characters that I've read about in a very, very long time, if not ever. Basically, Charlie Manx is this guy. He kind of has supernatural powers. He abducts children and brings them into this imagination scape that he calls Christmas Land, where it's perpetually Christmas. And, kind of says, like, hey, come with me. Like, it's this beautiful land where we can play and have games and have fun and stuff like that, which on its own is really creepy. But in Christmas Land, he starts to siphon the life force out of them, and it gives him unnaturally long life and supernatural powers. And Bing is his kind of like henchman who goes around in the real world and helps abduct these children and oftentimes murders their parents if they get in the way. And the two of them together are just the most slimy, grotesque duo. Like when I read about antagonists now in a horror novel, I use Charles Manx as kind of like my baseline. I'm like, okay, these antagonists are good, but are they as creepy as Charlie Manx? And a lot of times the answer is no. Just every time they're on page, the reader and the characters themselves are so uncomfortable. Joe Hill does just a great job of making this character seem unsettling. Like if he were standing next to me in real life, I'd probably just die because I'd be like, "What the hell's going on?" So if you're looking for a great book with an amazing antagonist, definitely check out Nosferatu. This is an awesome novel, and Charlie is and someone that I have not been able to stop thinking about ever since I finished this book. Coming up next, I read this book back in October of 2025, I believe. One of my favorite horror authors of all time released a new book, Felix Blackwell's The Sorrow Stones. This is, gosh, how do I describe this book? So it's basically about this kid. His name is Cole, and he comes across these stones that are shaped like animals, and he finds that as long as he has these stones in his possession, his life gets better in some way. But then he starts to realize that at the expense of somebody else that he cares about. So, like, one of the stones gives him really good mental clarity, but then he finds out that somebody he loves is having their mental sanity seeped away from them to kind of fuel his own mental clarity. And there's multiple stones that do various different things to the people around him. And so he tries to get rid of the stones, but he can't. He is like locked into them through some bizarre supernatural force. And what I like about this book, it's not going to be for everybody. Some people might hear this and be like, that sounds awful. But even in horror, sometimes you have these like silver linings, right? Like maybe you have a happy ending, or maybe there's a character that like has an epic victory at some point in the book. The Sorrow Stones is one of the most bleak and depressing novels I've ever read. There's no silver lining in this book. It is just pure depression. By the time you put this book down, I was just like, I felt gross. I was like, that was, like and like I said, some people might hate that. You might be like, that sounds like a awful time. As someone who loves horror, that gross feeling is what pushes me to read more and more horror. I just like being unsettled, and the Sorrow Stones definitely did that for me. Like, there's not even really one particular thing about this book I can point to. It's just the entire package. So if you're looking for a book that is bleak and does not have any ounce of happiness at all, The Sorrow Stones is one that you want to look for. Pretty much all of Felix Blackwell's stuff. If you haven't checked out his books, like I said, he's one of my favorite authors. I have all of his novels, and they're all like pretty much that same thing. Like they're just like they're the opposite of a feel good story. They're a feel bad story. If you want to feel bad, you can read some of his books. But this one has definitely stuck with me. I don't think I've felt as uncomfortable about a story as a whole since reading The Sorrow Stones. So definitely check it out if you're looking for that same depressing feeling. Coming up next is a book and an author I'm pretty sure everybody knows. It is Stephen King's Carrie. I tried to keep it one book per author in this stack. Otherwise, there'd be like 5 or 6 Stephen King books in here. So I went with Carrie, which isn't even my favorite Stephen King novel. I wouldn't even say it's in my top five. But Stephen King's Carrie is one that has stuck with me for a couple different reasons. One, I love Carrie as a character. I think her journey is so tragic. Everything that happens to her, I just feel so bad for her throughout this story, just being taunted and abused by her classmates. And then, of course, I won't spoil it because just in case somebody hasn't seen it, but the ending of this book is super tragic. And I felt so much sympathy for Carrie throughout this story. She's one of my favorite characters in any Stephen King novel. But then also the thing that stuck with me is just how this book is written. I found it really unique. It's basically one giant chapter where we're going through the events in real time, and then kind of thrown in the middle there will be this news article or like an interview with a character recounting some reactions to how the book ends. There's like this giant climax and finale at the end of the book, and there will be just like this article that's talking about the fallout from that event. And so you're kind of getting these hints as to how the book might end, and I really like that. I thought it was really uniquely written. The one thing that I regret is I wish I hadn't seen the movie like half a dozen times before I read the book, because I knew what was going to happen at the ending. So, seeing those news articles and interviews were just kind of like, okay, I know where it's going, but it was still entertaining to get there. I can only imagine if you've never experienced the story and you're reading the book as your first like exposure to it, how cool it would probably be to be going in real time and then you just get this snippet of like, wow, something really bad is going to happen at the end of this book, but I don't really exactly know how we get there. And just going on that journey for the first time, I wish I could experience it for the first time in novel format instead of knowing what happens because of the movie. But yeah, Carrie is a great book. It's Stephen King's first book, and that's another aspect of it where I just I read this and I'm like, wow, this is where he started. Like, it is such a solid novel. And for this to be your debut novel is extremely impressive. And it is one that I go back to a lot. When I'm looking at my shelves, I'm like, I had a great time reading Carrie. And I wish more than any other book on this list, I think that I could experience this again for the first time. So definitely check it out if you have not read it. Coming up next is another classic I think a lot of people will know, but a much older classic, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I had worries going into this one. I've kind of had a love hate relationship with the classics. Sometimes I go into a classic novel and I absolutely love it. And I'm like, wow, I can absolutely see why this has transcended time, why it's considered one of the greatest pieces of literature of all time. And sometimes I go into a classic and I just don't vibe with it at all. Maybe the writing style is so old school that I have a hard time understanding what's going on. Sometimes I just don't think the story is that exciting. And so going into Frankenstein, I knew it's a beloved story, but I wasn't sure how I was going to vibe with it. And I'll say that I love this book. The moment I put it down, I was like 5 out of 5. Let's go. This is an incredible story. But the reason it stuck with me is different than I thought it would be. So, it's a horror novel. There's some scary stuff in here. You got a man creating a monster out of dead body pieces, resurrecting them. But the thing about Frankenstein, it's a very emotional journey. It's this push and pull between Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, where they hate each other for various reasons. I don't want to spoil anything because I think like the book is very different from a lot of the movie renditions. If you've seen Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, I think that's the most accurate rendition, at least that I've seen. So if you're familiar with that movie, you might know a little bit more about the story. But it's just about these two guys that are at odds with each other and they're just trying to seek vengeance upon each other. And it just leads to a situation where nobody wins. And the ending of the story was one that really hit me with an emotional impact that has stuck with me ever since. I keep thinking about this story and I don't see it as a horror novel. I see it as this tragedy. And I guess it could be both. But yeah, I don't know if that's making any sense, but it's a really, really good book. You should definitely check it out. If you're a little weary on the classics like I am, you might be like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to read a book from 1818 and still enjoy it. But I will say that I read it and I thought it was absolutely incredible. It's one of my favorite classic novels that I've ever read in my entire life. And Frankenstein is an easy 5 out of 5 book for me. So check it out. Coming up next, this book is amazing. I love this story. It is Mary by Nat Cassidy. Nat Cassidy is very quickly becoming one of my favorite horror authors of all time. And Mary was the first book that I read by him. It follows this woman. Her name is Mary. She's a little older. She's kind of she's kind of falling apart. Like her life is not good. She is working at this bookstore, but she also is just dealing with a lot of like health issues. And then at the same time, she has these like bouts of hallucinations. And her aunt calls upon her. Her aunt Nadine calls upon her and says, "Hey, Mary, I need you to move back to your hometown. I'm dying. I need somebody to take care of me." So she moves back in with her aunt Nadine, who is just an awful, awful person and does not take care of Mary's needs at all. And at the same time, there's this weird kind of culty situation happening in her hometown that Mary gets sucked into, and it's just a wild ride. Like the thing that I love the most about this story is Mary herself. She is an excellent character when it comes to an unreliable narrator. She is like one of the best examples that I can think of because she's telling the story, but she is also, like I mentioned, just not in a good headspace. And so the entire novel, you're questioning. You're like, is this actually happening or is Mary just completely losing her mind? And in a lot of cases, you don't really get an answer. You don't know. And I love that aspect of the story. There's also there's a couple death scenes in this novel that are some of the most gruesome and potent death scenes that I can recall ever reading about. So if I don't know if, once again, this is kind of like Sorrow Stones. You might be like, wow, this guy's a psycho. He's just like, yeah, these death sequences are cool. But if that sounds like it's appealing to you, this is a great story with a lot of gruesome horror. And Mary as a character is just delightful and unnerving at the same time. And I love this book. I think about Mary constantly, and I'm on a journey to try to like read more Nat Cassidy because everything I've read by him has been incredible so far. So check him out and check this book out as well. All right, coming up next, we got two books left. The next one is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. Man, this book, it makes me so uncomfortable. Like, it is it's basically the story about these 3 characters. It's a young girl, and then a knight named Thomas, and then a priest. I think he's a priest. I think his name is Father Matthias. I'm drawing a blank right now, but it's these 3 characters that are traveling across this medieval French landscape. Delphine, the little girl, is having these visions and needs to be transported to the city, and so she's asked these other 2 gentlemen to kind of like protect her as she goes across this landscape. The only thing is that there's also this war happening between like Lucifer and the angels, and it has caused this bout of the Black Death plague to just decimate the landscape. So everywhere that these characters are going, there are just people dying, people starving, bodies everywhere. And Buellman does such a great job with the descriptions of these just desiccated landscapes where there's just death everywhere. To make matters even worse, because of this war that's going on between Lucifer and the angels, there are also demons everywhere. Some people say this book is kind of like if Dark Souls was a book, and I can attest to that. There are just these like horrific monsters all over the place, and our main heroes have to just battle against not only these terrible health conditions, but also these like demons that are just like slaughtering people across the French landscape. And Buellman just does an amazing job with graphic, grotesque descriptions. There's this one monster that always pops into my mind. It's like a river monster, and I might be a little biased because, as I mentioned, I'm scared of the water. But there's this whole sequence where our heroes have to battle this river monster, and it just made me. I was getting like goosebumps. I don't know, like it just made me so uncomfortable. Like there was a couple times where I'm like, I have to like get up and walk around because I was so grossed out by it. So if you are a fan of really unique horror stories, but also just like some of the most disturbing physical descriptions of death that I can think of, Between Two Fires is a really, really solid book. Check it out. It's awesome. And then the final book, perhaps the book that has stuck with me the most ever since I've read it, and it's one of my favorite books of all time when it comes to the horror genre. That is The Terror by Dan Simmons. Ever since I read this book, it immediately catapulted up to one of my favorite books of all time. It's definitely in the top 3 for me. I think it's like Stephen King's 11/22/63, and then Frank Herbert's Dune, and then The Terror coming in at 3rd place. I feel pretty comfortable with that. This is an incredible book that tackles horror from so many different angles. It's a story kind of loosely based off of a true story about these 2 ships, the Terror and the Erebus, that get stuck up in like the Arctic Circle. They're on an Arctic expedition, and their boats become trapped in the ice, and the sailors on the boats have to survive. And there's so many different elements working against them. First off, they're in the Arctic, so it's cold, right? Every time they go outside, they're fighting against the elements. They're trying not to lose their fingers and their toes and their limbs due to frostbite. But then you also have food. You know, food is an issue. They're trapped for years on the ice. And then there's this situation where the food starts to go bad. And so they have to start rationing. So the men are hungry all the time. Plus, Dan Simmons goes into excruciating detail, like chapters long detail about scurvy and what it does to your body. And boy, am I glad I don't live, in this time period, because this book made me so scared of getting scurvy. I'm like, I'm gonna eat so many fruits for the rest of my life. But you have that aspect of as well. To tack onto it, there's a supernatural element. There's this being out on the ice that is kind of like this giant polar bear creature that is slaughtering these crewmates, and they have no idea what it is or or how to fight it. It seems like it's immortal. And then probably one of my favorite parts of this book too is the human horror aspect. Like as these guys are freezing to death, as they're starving, as they're fighting this monster, they start to form these factions and these cliques. There's talks about mutiny, and you have your loyalists who are going to stick behind the captain, and then you have your other groups that are like, hey, we can do this better, let's take over. And you just have a lot of like drama between these men that lead to a lot of terrible and uncomfortable situations. And so that human aspect is one of the strongest aspects of The Terror. Despite all these other crazy things, those characters and their interactions together are what really locked me into this book. And eventually they have to scuttle ship, they have to abandon it, and they're just walking across this desolate frozen landscape, and all of these things are just weighing down on them chapter by chapter by chapter. And the word I can use to describe The Terror is just hopeless. Like the whole book, this is a huge book. It's almost 800 pages. It is just 800 pages of hopelessness. That's all you feel for all of these guys. And by the time I finished it, it felt like a gut punch. I loved it. I immediately went and watched the show on AMC, which I thought was really, really good. So if you like this book and you haven't seen the show, go check it out. It's pretty different, but it keeps a lot of it keeps some faithfulness to the original novel. But The Terror, one of my favorite books of all time, probably my favorite horror novel of all time. I love this story so much. Definitely check it out. And yeah, it's really awesome. All right, y'all. So those are 8 horror novels, 9, I guess, if you include The Only Good Indians. I didn't talk about it very much, but it's really, really good. So check that one out too. But 8 horror novels that I love, ones that have stuck with me and just, burned into my brain ever since I finished them that I can't stop thinking about. If you've read any of those novels and you have thoughts on them, let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you have any other novels that you've read that are kind of similar to any of these books and you want to recommend them to me, I would love you if you did that. I'm always looking for new great horror novels, especially ones that are reminiscent of books that I already love. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. My name is Christian. This is the Endless TBR. Stay tuned for more book related videos, and y'all have a great day. Peace.